Today we're looking at lesson 2.4, which is deductive reasoning. The last lesson we were looking more into inductive reasoning, and unlike inductive reasoning, which we used patterns and observations to make our conjectures, for deductive reasoning we're using actual facts and rules and definitions or properties, things that are already created in order to decide our answer or decide our thinking. So that is deductive reasoning. So inductive reasoning, like I said already, would be using a pattern of examples to make a conjecture like we did for the last lesson. Now, for deductive reasoning, there is a law, and it's called the law of detachment. And this law is basically to prove a conjecture, and since the conjecture requires deductive reasoning to be able to prove it, one way of using deductive reasoning would be to use the law of detachment. Now, to go into more detail about the law of detachment, think about this statement. If a car is out of gas, then it will not start. Sarah's car is out of gas. So, we can logically conclude using deductive reasoning, because we have facts, that when the car is out of gas, the car will not start. That is a fact. So since Sarah's car is out of gas, we can conclude that Sarah's car will not start. The law of syllogism is a different type of law. It's another way of proving deductive reasoning. And an example of that would be using this statement. So for this statement, it says, if you get a job, then you will earn money. If you earn money, then you will buy a car. So think about, with the transitive property, we took out the middle. This is almost the same kind of thinking. So if you think about, if you get a job, we can conclude then you will buy a car, because you earn enough money if you get a job. So if you earn enough money, you will be able to buy a car. So if you take the you will earn enough money out, the conclusion could be that if you get a job, you will buy a car. So here we're going to think about what type of reasoning we're using, whether we're using inductive or deductive reasoning. And this is actually in your textbook on page 117. But look at the first example here. It says all of the signature items on the restaurant's menu shown are noted with a special symbol. Kevin orders a menu item that has this symbol next to it, so he concludes that the menu item that he has ordered is a signature item. Would this be using inductive reasoning, which is a pattern of examples or observations, Or would this be deductive reasoning, where you're using facts and rules and definitions and properties? Well, I would say, since he noted and observed that the menu item had a special symbol next to it, I would say that this would be more inductive reasoning. Because it's based on the pattern that every menu has these symbols on it, or the observation that every menu has the symbols on it. Now, 1B, it says, none of the students who ride Raul's bus own a car. It says, Ebony rides a bus to school, so Raul concludes that Ebony does not own a car. Now, it is a fact that none of the students ride Raul's bus own a car, so if Ebony does not own a car and she rides Raul's bus, we would say that this is deductive reasoning. Another example would be, it says, every time Katie has worn her favorite socks to a softball game, she has gotten at least one hit. So Katie is wearing her favorite socks to a game tonight, so she concludes that she will get at least one hit. Well, it's not a fact that she's going to get a hit, but it's a pattern that she's noticed. So I would say that that would be inductive reasoning. Now, deductive would be something like this. If John is late making his car insurance payment, he will be assessed a late fee of $50. That's a fact. So John's payment is late this month, so he concludes that he will be assessed a late fee of $50. So since that's based on a fact that he will be charged that if he misses his payment or if he's late, then we could say that that's deductive reasoning. Now this example, we're going to determine whether the conclusion is valid for what you're given. So for this, you're given that 3 points are non-collinear. They determine a plane. So it says points A, B, and C lie in plane G. Can we say that points A, B, and C are non-collinear? So you have to be careful with the wording here, but it says if 3 points are non-collinear, they determine a plane. It says points A, B, and C are non-collinear, and that's my conclusion. Well, it just said that points A, B, and C lie in plane G, but it doesn't necessarily say that they form plane G. So I would say this is invalid. Because A, B, and C could be collinear, they could form a line, and they could be collinear in the plane. But it's when they only are the 3 points that make up the plane is when they're non-collinear. Now 2B, we need to determine whether this is valid. It says if a student turns in a permission slip, then the student can go on the field trip. Well, Philippe turned in his permission slip, so it says conclusion, Philippe can go on the field trip. That is definitely valid. And the law of detachment would be Y. Because with detachment, you have the hypothesis and you have the conclusion. So if you are given that the hypothesis is what you have, you can conclude that the conclusion is your conclusion. Here we have another example where we need to figure out whether this is valid or not. So it says if a figure is a square, then it is a polygon. Figure A is a square, so figure A is a polygon. This is valid, and this is also using the law of detachment. Here we have another one. We need to determine which statement follows logically from the given statements. So statement 1, it says, if you do not get enough sleep, then you will be tired. Statement 2 says, if you are tired, then you will not do well on the test. So what can we conclude? Well, can we conclude if you are tired, then you will not get enough sleep? If you do not get enough sleep, then you will not do well on the test. If you do not do well on the test, then you did not get enough sleep, or there is no valid conclusion. Well, this is actually using the law of syllogism, because if you see, they've repeated this middle statement about being tired. So if you do not get enough sleep, then you will be tired. If you are tired, then you will not do well on the do well on the test. So if we take that out, we would have our logical conclusion be G. If you do not get enough sleep, then you will not do well on the test. And then the last one, which also has to do with law of syllogism, we need to determine or make a valid conclusion from what we're given, and then tell whether this has to do with law of detachment or law of syllogism. So I already told you that it's law of syllogism. If it's no valid conclusion, then we would write no valid conclusion. But this says the midpoint divides a segment into two congruent segments. If two segments are congruent, then their measures are equal. So if M is the midpoint of AB, can we then conclude that AM is congruent to MB, or AM is equal to MB? Yes, because the law of syllogism says if we take out the part that's repeated, the two congruent segments and the two congruent segments, we would get our answer. The midpoint divides a segment into two congruent segments. Their measures are equal. So if you're given the midpoint, then the measures of the two segments are equal. And that's the law of syllogism. And that concludes our lesson.